Last year, RCMP had breached private property to sabotage 3 excavators near the Coutts blockade.
So I can confirm that we disabled 3 excavators.
Yep.
To prevent the equipment from being used in the illegal activity of the blockade.
Recently, I broke the news again that the owners of these vehicles are now suing the RCMP for this alleged misconduct. Admission of Section 2B charter violations and damages amounting to over $130,000 are being sought by the plaintiffs. Excavator owners also allege that orders to sabotage these vehicles came from a much higher level. To watch that recent report in full, which contains an exclusive response from the RCMP, and to find out more about this situation, including the connection behind this and the Coutts blockade demonstrations against vaccine mandates and COVID restrictions, head to truckerlawyer.ca. In our last report, we interviewed Chad Williamson of Williamson Law, the firm representing all 3 plaintiffs in this claim. These excavator owners may have already suffered financially because of the RCMP, but as a Rebel News initiative, Williamson Law's legal fees won't be an added burden. Rather, viewers like yourself have picked up the tab, crowdfunding their entire legal defense. To keep these efforts strong-footed as this proceeds in the months ahead, go to truckerlawyer.ca. Today, we bring you our full interview with Chad Williamson, where he details the statement of claim now submitted and highlights the situation these excavator owners have and now face.
Everything is legal what we did.
And we had parked them closer to the highway and they weren't happy with that. So we backed them all the way off, about half a kilometer.
Yeah, that's an important part of it.
Yes. So they demanded we moved them and they still did it.
Yeah.
They still disabled them.
After it was moved here, somebody sabotaged the equipment. There's wires cut, there's filters removed, spray foam put up, fuel lines. Like these things, all 3 machines, they're valuable machines. And it's going to take a lot of work to put them back into order. I can't see that happening. Like there's parts missing, parts have to be replaced. There's a lot of labor that's got to go into fixing these things before these fellas can use their own equipment again. But what we do know is that we're not fighting this fight violently. We're a peaceful protest, but we don't expect our authorities to break the law and to vandalize and to trespass. I think somebody should be held to account.
Are the RCMP being sued for over $100,000?
The answer is yes. So statement of claim is in the Court of King's Bench Civil Division. So it's a little bit different than some of the other claims that have been filed by my office and some of the other constitutional lawyers around the province over the last 2 years. So it's not an application seeking some sort of a constitutional declaration. It's not an application for judicial review of bad law. This is a straightforward civil claim at the Court of King's Bench Civil Division. So a statement of claim is the actual document that commences that lawsuit. And this is the most common kind of lawsuit where, you've got somebody who has suffered injury or damages as a result of the actions of another party, and they're pleading to the court to get a judgment against them for monetary damages, and that's what we're seeking for these fellows. The process is a little bit slower because you've got such a long limitation date. Obviously, there are constitutional elements, and we've actually pled that there were breaches of our client's charter rights to freedom of expression. The excavators were only to be used for the hanging of flags, which is an enumerated part of freedom of expression, as detailed in Section 2B of the Charter on Rights and Freedoms. So there is a minor charter argument, but what we're really seeking here is for the RCMP to compensate the owner-operators of these excavators for the unlawful destruction of those vehicles. The statement of claim contains a couple of different parts that every lawsuit is required to have. One of the big portions is obviously a part called the statement of facts, which essentially is the story of what happened. During the Coutts blockade around the middle of February, the owner-operators had sought and obtained permission to drive these excavators and these pieces of heavy equipment, there's 3 of them in total, down to a farmer's private property, whereon on, they would basically just park the excavators and hang flags and messages of support for the blockade. Now, again, that's their charter right to do so. We've all got a right to freedom of expression. The RCMP had alleged that these posed a danger to something. We're not sure exactly what the danger is. They asked that the excavators be moved. It was my understanding that an agreement actually had been struck that the excavators would be moved to a different spot outside of what the RCMP were considering to be a dangerous area. And it's further my understanding that before that happened, the RCMP trespassed onto this private property and completely, they didn't just disable the excavators. They vandalized them and they sabotaged them to the point where they required extensive repairs to bring them back into operation. So these are things like damaging fuel lines, using spray foam on critical engine components, cutting wires. This goes beyond mere disabling or seizing. This is really a destruction of private property by a government body without what we say is lawful reason for them to do so. And that's deserving of not just compensatory damages, but aggravated damages and punitive damages against the RCMP for their conduct. We break damages down in a number of ways. It took us quite a while to get quantification, receipts, and everything. Each one of the owner-operators of the vehicles that were destroyed by the RCMP, or at least vandalized and damaged by the RCMP, they've suffered what we call compensatory damages, right, for loss of use, for the repairs. We're also suing for what are called punitive and aggravated damages for essentially just taking unlawful steps to basically trash this stuff without any reasonable reason to do so. We haven't seen any of their production, so it's not clear at this point whether or not they got a court order to do that. I'm guessing the answer is no. We're suing for close to or over $150,000. One of the most important things is through the civil process, and this is important for people to understand as well, is there's a process after all of the claim and the defense is filed that we call discovery of documents. So it's during that portion of the claim where both parties, both the plaintiff and the defendant, are expected and required by law to provide all documentation that is material and relevant to anything that has been pled in the documents, which is anything that has basically been written down in the claims. It's going to be our intention to find out what the motivation was by requesting the internal documents pertaining to the decision to disable these vehicles. So was this a reprisal? Was it a tit for tat? We don't know. But that's going to be part of the lawsuit, and we do want to find those documents. And if necessary, we will make an application for the disclosure of the same. Because this is a civil matter and not an urgent constitutional matter, this is more like a long game of chess than a quick game of rugby. And it allows both parties to strategize. After you file a statement of claim, you've got up to a year to serve it. It's my understanding that we're in the process of commencing service on the RCMP, right around this time. Once received by law, the defendant has 20 days to file their statement of defense. It's common convention and courtesy in most lawsuits for a brief extension of that time to be granted, especially if there's a lawyer on the file. So I expect that we'll get a defense in the next month or two from the RCMP. From there, the plaintiff has 3 months to provide all of their documentation further to the discovery process. 2 months after the defendant receives the plaintiff's documents, the defendant has to provide documents. After that point, and this is interesting, there's a period of what's called questioning. Now, this is a kind of like an examination, questioning the other side on the documents that they've provided. And it's through this process that we really get into the nitty-gritty. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Of course, at any point, the RCMP or the plaintiff can make offers to settle this matter. And frankly, very, very rarely do civil matters end up making it to trial. Usually there's a settlement of some sort. So We don't know what the RCMP's appetite is to settle this, and frankly, we don't really have instructions from our clients on whether or not they're willing to settle at this juncture either. But the next step is going to be defense from them, documents from us, documents from them, and then the questioning.
Is this a sort of tit for tat, you think? They thought, well, this much money is being canceled out, millions of dollars a day. What's a couple $100,000 to sabotage these excavators?
Yeah, so I mean, legally speaking, they're completely two separate issues. And while, the excavators were being used to show support for the blockade, and, perhaps there was some element of retaliation against supporters of the blockade by the RCMP, at this point, we don't really know. In terms of the damages that, Alberta suffered as a result of the blockade, in other matters, we take the position that they've really done a bad job of being able to a certainty, quantify those damages. It's been postulated, and some of the evidence shows that a lot of the truckers that were heading towards the Coutts Sweetgrass border crossing simply went to another route and really didn't lose anything apart from maybe a 10-minute wait. Now, that's not to say that damages weren't caused, and of course we've all heard stories and allegations of the borders disruption and all that sort of stuff. But frankly, that doesn't give anybody a lawful justification for trespassing onto private property without the authorization of that property owner, and then committing such an egregious act of vandalism and sabotage. I mean, frankly, if they really did want to disable these pieces of equipment, I'm sure, however unlawful it might have been, they could have done something like removing the batteries, or there's probably a lesser amount of destruction that could have been done to these devices or these vehicles than was done.
Media outlets and politicians have tied Coutts demonstrators to violence, extremism, and racism. Is there any association between any of that and this excavator situation?
No, absolutely not. That's like saying, we got a crowd of 1,000 people and there's a bad egg in there, so let's just paint the whole crowd with horrible brush. At the end of the day, the owner-operators of the excavators and the heavy equipment, they were just supporters of the Coutts demonstration. They're expressing their charter right to freedom of expression, and they were subject to what we say is completely unlawful and frankly disgusting action by the RCMP, not just to damage them civilly, but also to shut them up and to infringe on their right to freedom of expression. It's overreach by the RCMP, and we're going to hold them to account for that. So, I don't know, racism and evil Coutts border guys aside, the RCMP can't go destroying private property, so we're going to hold them to account, as every Albertan should if that happens to them.
These excavator owners are alleging in excess of $130,000 in damages caused by the RCMP, not to mention the massive costs associated with taking action against such a large federal agency. And this has only just begun. However, thanks to the generosity of viewers like yourself, these owners aren't suffering additionally out of pocket to cover these legal fees. Crowdfunding through truckerlawyer.ca, a Rebel News initiative, has financed Williamson Law to represent all three plaintiffs. If you want to donate and show your support as these efforts continue, go to truckerlawyer.ca. We'll keep you updated as the case continues and more information becomes available. For Rebel News, Sydney Fizzard. To see our latest coverage on this excavator story and to donate to their legal defense, head to truckerlawyer.ca.